Well, good evening. I'm so pleased to be here. As I mentioned earlier, I absolutely love trees. I love redwoods and sequoias. And I'm here to share that love with you. And if you're not already in love with them, hopefully you will be soon. I have a couple of colleagues with me that are also volunteers, as I am, for Propagation Nation. I'd like to introduce them. Bob Barnes, who's our Director of Horticulture, and Ted LeGreed, who's our Director of Partnership Development. So, and we also have a guest, Terry Lammers, who is actually from near Salem, Oregon, and took the time to come up and spend some time with us because he loves redwoods like I do, and he loves to talk about them, and he knows so much about them because he started growing them 35 years ago, and since then he's planted over 20,000. So we will be able to learn from his experience. I will share some ideas with you as far as Propagation Nation and our approach and why we do what we do. So, first of all, Propagation Nation, we incorporated as a nonprofit in 2019, and our mission is we're an intergenerational movement. And that's really just like the Washington Farm Forestry Group. You're an intergenerational movement. We're trying to renew the environment. That's our intent. So does Washington Farm Forestry Association. Everything you do, I'm so happy to have joined as a member a year ago because I feel like I'm in the right group. We have such common goals. Here's some of our intergenerational folks. Anytime we are able to, we get young people involved because they are the future. They're the future for the trees. They're going to have to carry on what we only just begin. So this is Washington Farm Forestry Association, stewards of land for generations to come. To me, that's another way of saying the same thing of being intergenerational movement to renew the environment. But of course, we are very focused on redwoods and sequoias. And why? What is the big deal? What is so unique about redwoods? Why are we taking our time and effort to really convince people that these are important trees to start thinking about and planting? You all know they get huge. They store carbon like no other species on the face of the planet. They live for a really long time, over 2,000 years, certainly. So, and then they'll store the carbon that long as well. Their heartwood is so stable, they'll, even after the tree has been cut down or have burned, they'll store that just for as long as it took for that tree to grow. Redwoods used to exist in the Northwest millions of years ago. We see our effort as just simply returning them home. They got pushed out by the glaciers. And do we have glaciers here now? We have a glacier park in the U.S., but we don't have glaciers. Perfect environment ecologically for redwoods to grow. The only reason they're not here is they don't walk very fast, or they'd be back here. Coast redwoods are really unique in that they have the genetic ability to adapt. They have 6 sets of chromosomes. All of us have only 2 sets, one from each parent. They're called hexaploids. It's probably why they've lived for tens of millions of years, is they've been able to adapt. Point 7 here is probably one of the most important. They produce toxic compounds and embed that in their heartwood. And that's why they are pest-free, they are insect-free, they are disease-free, because their heartwood is just impermeated with stuff that they've invested a lot of their energy in preserving it. Maybe that's something they learned in their million-year travel. I don't know. But they're so capable. It's the reason they live so long. Here's just a scientific look at how much growth and carbon they can sequester compared to, and these are the other babies. Western red cedar did not even make the map here. Just doesn't sequester enough. But yeah, here you can see coast redwood is virtually double anything else here. Giant sequoia is right up there with it. Yes, please.
So is that table for the growth, is that in its range as we know it down in California? The annual growth rate and the biomass?
So these measurements were done by the group at the bottom here, Steve Sillett and that group, and they did those measurements in world record holding forests, so probably in California is where the redwoods and the sequoias were measured. Certainly there are redwoods all over the world. There's actually 500,000 giant sequoias over in the United Kingdom. There's only 80,000 in the native range in California. So they've been moving them over to England for a long time. So they have more than 5 times as many there. It takes page 2 to really cover this specialness. Redwoods are both fire resistant and fire resilient. They're hard to burn, but if you get a severe enough fire, they will burn. But then they bounce back. They'll come back to life. They'll send out basal sprouts and actually grow an entire new redwood forest because that heartwood and the root structure of the trees is just so strong. Once you establish them, after harvest, you don't need to go out and plant more. They'll regrow. Again, the root structures will grow. You don't need to apply herbicides. You don't need to plant. You don't need to buy any new seedlings. They'll just regrow. When people were trying to farm in California and they'd cut down the redwood forest so they could have some farm space, the redwoods would just pop up and they couldn't even farm there. From a biodiversity perspective, and this is what's so important, they mix very well with any of the species that we have. They already are here, and they're already mixed, and they're doing just fine, both species, the natives as well as the redwoods and the sequoias. And they should be considered a part of any integral functioning ecosystem. And Terry will tell you a little bit more about it from his experience. They command a market premium. Redwood is really amazing wood. Certainly it's mostly used right now for decking and for fencing, and there's a pretty gigantic market for that. But the marketplace, when you're selling logs, and certainly it's not here in Washington right now, there is markets and mills in California, and Terry will mention there's one or two in Oregon. But yeah, they would stabilize our forest economy in Washington state if we had that kind of diversity here. I think that is just so, to me, that is probably the most essential part. When you consider how under assault our native species are from just the heat we're getting, the climate change, the insects take advantage of that, the beetles, we have dieback of cedars. There's just so much going on. And these trees are not experiencing that same difficulty. They maybe have some unique issues themselves. I mean, coast redwoods, there's a reason coast is in the word, is in their name. They like to be near water. But they will certainly grow with a good water table. So lots of opportunity to to grow these. So what has Propagation Nation done? We've been busy for several years. Certainly the pandemic slowed us down, but this past season, between October and March of this year, we delivered 14,000 redwoods and sequoias to people throughout Oregon and Washington. You can see virtually half of them went to publicly funded groups such as fish enhancement groups, conservation districts, water resource inventory areas, and even the Washington Department of Transportation. They haven't received their trees yet, but we've met with them, and they're going to start planting sequoias in some of the areas, especially where they're already taking out trees just to put in real north of Seattle and so on. This is our plan for this year. We have stretch goals at Propagation Nation. We were planting about 1,000 trees a year up until a year and a half ago, and we decided that is just not going to cut it. We need to really increase what we're doing. And so at that time we purchased 13,300 trees. We actually had some in a nursery as well, so that's where the 14,000 came from. But we've decided we want to triple the amount of trees we deliver every year. So this is 40,000, is tripling the 13,300. Next year, we're planning to do 120,000. The year after that, 360,000. The year after that, we're going to hit 1 million. That's our plan. You might say, yeah, that's really ambitious. You're never going to get there. Well, you got to dream big. And when I began to think big, I asked myself, well, so what's the limit here? Well, how many trees are planted every single year in Oregon and Washington? Who would have thought? 92 million. 92 million. So if we were distributing 1 million redwoods, that would just be barely a drop in the bucket. You can barely see us on the map here, 1%. And yet, if you think of the qualities, the unique qualities that redwoods and sequoias have, why wouldn't you want that increasing? And in fact, if you were doing what Terry Lammers is in Oregon, he's got 200,000 Douglas fir planted, but he's also got 20,000 redwoods planted. And he'll tell you the story, but he's done a lot of research by planting different species in different parts of his property. In the high site, a low site, south facing, north facing, watery, dry. In every case, the redwoods won. He said the experiment's over. He's only planting redwoods now. So whenever he has more room to harvest some Doug fir, it won't be more Doug fir that go in, it'll be redwoods. So how can we help you? Why are we taking our time to address you and share this message? We will have, as you saw, the 40,000, we will have a readily available supply of redwood and sequoia plug seedlings in quantities ranging from 10 to 10,000 or 40,000. So we will, I mean, it's hard to get a hold of redwoods unless you know somebody like Terry and he purchased more than he's going to plant. But if you want to try your hand at planting redwoods and plant 100 or 200 or 10 or 1,000, sometimes the minimum order is like 25,000. And you have to order that a year ahead of time when you want to plant it. So that's what Propagation Nation can be. We can fill that. We've already ordered them. They're going to be growing. We can make them available to you. They can be shipped directly to your door. Last year we bought all of our seedlings in Oregon. This year we've added a nursery in Roy, Washington, Silva Seed. So potentially you could even just drop by and pick them up. Saves a bunch of shipping costs. The little photo on the right here is a photo I took yesterday at Roy. It's one of the redwoods growing in the containers there. They're growing 25,000 more of those. Frequently asked questions on our website, and I'll show you those in a second, the types of things, and it's really aimed at a tree farming audience, people, small forest landowners, whether you're harvesting or have other reasons for growing the trees. There is a lot of information there, and I'll just show you some of it. But in addition to that, this fall, it'll be here this fall, it'll probably be developed. This summer might be available before this fall. We have two more things. We're going to develop a set of resources that forest landowners can consult to get more information on redwood silviculture and marketing. Also, we're going to come up with a set of principles to guide strategically incorporating redwoods on your land, which will include 3 different scenarios depending on what appeals to you the most. It could be, for example, a focus on increasing forest resilience to invasive species and climate change, so more of an ecological-based strategy. It could be a focus on economic return, the third one there, where you're really planning to harvest the timber, or it could be a hybrid between those two. But those will be developed and will be explained in depth on the website. I can't click on these, I'm not connected up to the internet here, but you can. So if you went to our website and you looked under Redwoods, you'll find this FAQ page. And so all of these questions have an answer underneath it. Just click on the question and the answers will follow. And there's 3 different sections: planting, establishment, and growth, which is just kind of a general section, ecology and ethics, and then one that's specific for silviculture. So Propagation Nation can also help by bringing in ideas from experienced redwood growers such as Terry Lammers. He planted his first redwood 35 years ago, since planted 20,000. I will invite Terry up here to talk through some of the information for you, answer questions. He'll show some slides. So thank you, Terry, very much. Well, okay, Terry, take it away.
Thank you, Philip. Let me explain a little bit about who I am, what we do. We've got about 490 acres of timber. My degree is in economics, not forestry. But about 46 years ago, we had a lot of hardwoods on the place that we wanted to get rid of so we could plant something that is more productive as far as marketable. And we had a lot of Oregon white oak, big leaf maple, almost none of it marketable for logs, a lot of brush. So over the last 46 years roughly, we've sold over 18,000 cords of U-cut firewood. And so I know Sam Madsen because we bought chainsaws at what I've told him several times is the best saw shop in the world. Unfortunately, he sold it, but that's life. So about 37 years ago, I started reading about other trees, and I started an investment club when I was in college. And one of the first rules when you invest is diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket unless you're crazy or something else. But anyway, so we planted a lot of coast redwood when we converted these hardwoods. I mean, a lot of Douglas fir when we converted these hardwood stands. And about 37 years ago, I got to thinking, we've got all our eggs in one basket for the most part. Our place is too dry for western hemlock. There was one native western red cedar on the property coming out of a creek. And so it's mainly Douglas fir, and it was too dry literally for grand fir. In the late 80s, the grand fir had mass mortality. And I'm sure that many of you, I assume that grand fir grows in this area. And one thing about grand fir, when it dies, it falls apart real quick. You've got a short window of time to market it. So anyway, we started planting a bunch of species from memory. Douglas fir was the first big one. Then western red cedar. We didn't do any hemlock. We did some erngum eucalyptus because it was supposed to be good down to 6 below zero, according to a guy that I listened to, or 4 below zero. When it got to 6 above zero, most of it died. And the next winter, when it got to something like 10 below, it killed the rest of them. So that was the end of it. And the reason why I was looking for erngum eucalyptus, it's a very good firewood. And if we could put on 4 cords per year, per acre, right now we're getting $70 a cord for oak and $60 for fir. And, you know, it'd be a fairly decent income. Not for the whole place, but as a portion of it. So then I planted western larch, Japanese larch, black locust, Willamette Valley ponderosa pine, and a couple others, I guess. But I've got a question. Philip talked about decks and fencing being a huge market, and it is. Guess what the biggest market for lumber in the U.S. was in the late 1980s? Anybody want to guess what type of product was made? Pallets. That's the answer. Now it's something you never see almost. You know, you go to, now they've moved a lot to plastic pallets. But that was the #1 use, bigger than housing, bigger than fencing, bigger than decks. That's amazing. Okay, let's talk about, let's say that I'm into redwood. My son is too. He wants us to clear cut the whole place and plant redwood. And we'll get there. Planting density, I think that was your question. That depends on your goal. If you just want to cover an acre and have beautiful trees that you'll never market, that would be different than if you want smaller limbs, the kind of log that a log buyer would look at down the road and say, oh, those are nice, I like them. The planting density that we're using is typically about 10.5 to 11 feet. But our goal is not to have a forested area. Our goal is to have a forested area that grows marketable timber. And you'll see pictures. I think you'll kind of think we're doing that. People are always asking me, where can you sell logs? That is an issue. There's one mill that I'm aware of. I've been through the mill on a tour called, in Oregon, Wren Hill Lumber near Philomath, Oregon, which is west of Corvallis. And they buy logs by the ton. And I don't think they're paying a high price, but because they don't need to. If you know that area, it's right in the middle. It's kind of like a black hole with timber all around it. It just sucks it in, you know. There's another mill that I've been told takes coast redwood logs and mills 2 days a week in the very southwest corner of Oregon. I don't know the name of that mill. I do know that years ago, Georgia Pacific, that was bought out by Interfor in Philomath, Oregon, they took in some coast redwood logs and milled it. That plant recently shut down. I know a guy that had a mill. It was called Cedar something. It was in Salem, Oregon, and he cut cedar. And just for the heck of it, one time, some guy called and said, I got some redwood logs. Do you want them? And he said, yeah. He took in, I think it was 3 truckloads. And I did a bunch of work for him. I sharpened chains and squared up bars, and that's my area of expertise. And I was in there when a guy was loading a board as it was cut off the mill onto the trailer. And this guy, Daryl was his first name, he said, I can't keep any inventory of coast redwood. Gee, that's rough. You know, you've got to be optimistic to grow trees, right? You plant a tree and you got to wait, 20 years maybe or more before the first commercial thin. You got to have some faith. I wonder if you could pass those boards around that I brought right on that counter back there. We have a portable sawmill. We had to cut, this is just run of the mill. We had to cut a tree to improve a road, and we've cut a bunch of it. Now in our shop, we've got a bunch of shelves where we store old chainsaws and stuff like that. So if you want to get rid of old chainsaws or anything like that, we'll take them.
Is that because of the size of the redwood log that only a few mills can handle?
No. A mill, like Willamina Lumber in Willamina, Oregon, used to be the biggest mill in the world as far as capacity. For them to do only, say, 30 truckloads of one species, that's an hour of production, literally, or maybe a couple hours. I just talked to a guy that did a bunch of work there, and they're now redoing that mill. So it probably will once again be the biggest mill. After the 2009 recession, the biggest sawmill in the world turned out to be in Sweden. And I don't know.
They're just turning down redwood because of the lack of volume?
Yeah, to make it economical for a big mill, they've got to have a lot of wood. And not just production-wise, but also marketing. They don't want to sell only 1 million board feet of redwood lumber. They want 50 million, 100 million. So, but we've got this portable sawmill, and when you see the boards that are going around, we've milled Oregon white oak, we've milled cherry, cottonwood, a few other species. Redwood is absolutely gorgeous compared to everything else, and it's stable. We recently did some cherry, and the cherry just torqued out and warped and cracked and everything. The redwood is very, very stable and hasn't cracked at all. And it's down to 2% moisture, so it's as dry as it gets. So yeah, you got to be optimistic. You got to, and the price, I'm not sure when it was, but I was doing a bunch of research, and the price for redwood lumber sold by an outfit in Eugene, Oregon, might have been 3 years ago, was, there it is, $49.50 per 1,000 board feet, when Douglas fir is $1,200. Now, we might never be able to get $4,950 per 1,000 board feet for lumber that we mill. But if we could get 2,000, that would be pretty good. It mills beautifully, easy. It's a softwood, but incredibly strong for the weight. So, who has problems on their trees from bear? Okay, we don't have bear on our property. They're just not in that area. Maybe because there's too many cougars. But anyway, bear on redwoods can be a real problem. My son said they all have got northbound lanes, southbound lanes, merge lanes, off ramps, just like I-5. They're not eating the coast redwood. They're just stomping them when they're little. Yeah, we don't have any deer browse. Yeah, need to talk about the weather. It got to 117 degrees June 17th, right 4 years ago. Our rock roads in our woods had probably billions of fir needles on them. The canopy looking through the Douglas fir stands was thinner after that. There were 3 days above 110 degrees. The previous all-time record in Salem, Oregon was 108 degrees, okay? So 3 days above 110, one of those days was 117. The trees were freaked out, not the redwood. They just thought, oh, this is nice. I mean, they're tough. We've had no mortality from the heat. Redwood is susceptible to very cold weather, especially the first year or two. Yeah, it is susceptible, and you can manage some of that risk by planting at the right time. I think I talked about how the nursery wanted to get rid of the seedlings that we'd bought. So we took and started planting them January 5th. That was a big mistake. We did have mortality. It got down to 12 degrees and just stayed cold and dry with the northeast wind. Our place gets a lot of northeast wind coming right out of eastern British Columbia and Alberta. And a combination of low humidity, high wind speed, bright sunshine, and very low temperatures. It's hard on Douglas fir, it's hard on redwood. So we've had mortality from Douglas fir also. In fact, one time we planted trees, the guy for some reason said they had to be planted in November. We did. Well, then we got one of those cold spells, and this is 32 years ago. We had over 50% mortality on those Douglas fir things. So our place, basically, I start looking around February 5th. If the long range forecast is for beautiful planting weather, high humidity, rain, foggy, etc., we'll start planting. But if it's questionable, dry weather, a lot of sunshine, we'll wait another few days. Basically, after February 10th in Polk County, Oregon, the weather is almost never going to be cold and harmful to the seedlings, whatever species you're planting. Oh, we've never had a coast redwood uproot in an ice or windstorm. I'll talk about a lot of that. Our property has an elevation range of about 200 feet to 600 feet. The 600 feet, the highest point is the highest point for miles around in every direction. The big winds come from the southwest, and we had an area planted to Douglas fir there, planted in 1981, I think, and we finally clear cut it almost 2 years ago. Every windstorm would knock down Douglas fir, and pretty soon it was just a terrible stand. It became a Himalayan blackberry patch to a large degree. And when we clear cut that 41-year-old stand, we only got about 8,000 or 9,000 board feet per acre, which, I'd go to work at a good saw shop like Madsen's before I'd keep farming, tree farming, if that's all we could do. So anyway, they bend and break, but they don't uproot. I've done some research, and I know someone that had 5 redwoods, and they were chlorotic, yellowy, the needles. And I've done some studying on that. I wouldn't say I've got the answer, but it could be due to a lack of sulfur in the soil. I don't know if you can read it, 116 feet tall, 19-inch DBH. This is 35-year-old plant. Oh, the redwood's 35 years previous. The coast redwood, and okay, But that's a redwood, just looking up. The redwood tree, many years ago I came up with, when I was teaching to my son about forestry stuff and about thinning. I'd say, well, Eric, what do you want? You want to cut that tree there, that puny little thing that's not doing anything, or you want to cut that one there that's maybe 10 feet taller and beautiful form? And I said, that's a Michael Jordan tree. If you want a good basketball team, you want to go with the Michael Jordans of the world, not the Pee Wee Herman basketball player. So we always harvest the little trees, and we haven't this is near what we call a park pond. Our long-term objective for this area is to have a pond, and the pond's about a little over half an acre. So my great-grandchildren perhaps will be fishing there, and they'll say, and these trees will be 5 feet in diameter. Who's the crazy person that planted these redwoods? Well, that was our ancestor. But the redwood trees, for the most part, if they're planted close enough together, are beautiful in form, small limb size. Okay, I'm not high. Here is the second stand that we planted. Keep in mind the first 27, 8 years was an experiment. We planted them in the highest areas on the property, the lowest. This is a severe frost pocket here. This is a major road over here, and our shop is up that way about a quarter mile. And many times you can be driving along in a four-wheeler, and it's just like going into the cooler at Costco. I mean, where everything's cold, it's just like, whoa. And it's literally that quick, too. But this used to be a field. And 27 years ago, I got stuck baling hay there. And it was always too wet, and it's extremely, extremely heavy soil, heavy clay. There was water standing there 2 weeks ago. And so I planted this, and keep in mind, it was still an experiment. So we planted coast redwood and western red cedar. And the western red cedar, I estimate, has about 10% of the biomass of the coast redwood. And it might look not like that at all now, but we've pre-commercial thinned this. We've cut out the little red cedar, and most of them are little. So the ones that you see are the few biggest ones. And they're up to 105 feet tall, and that's, I think that this is at the park pond. They're just gorgeous. In 2009, this area was a Douglas fir stand that was about 25 years old. We had a big snow and ice and rain event, and it was about 28 degrees. The trees got extremely heavy, and this area was clear cut by the storm, the Douglas fir. So, we had damage on the rest of our property in the 2009 ice event, so we planted it to coast redwood. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we had another ice event, and this one, it was big. Much worse than the prior one, 2009. But the redwood stand took it a lot better. We didn't have a road open on our entire property. There were places where you couldn't even tell where you were at. Places where I built that road, and it's like, where am I? But there were so many trees down. So the interesting thing the Douglas fir in this stand in 2009 uprooted. Most of the trees uprooted, some of them broke off. But I'd say at least 90% of the Douglas fir in the 2009 storm went down some way or another. I think it might have been 3 years ago. Not a single coast redwood uprooted ever on our place. They bent over, and you can see some of them bent over, but not a single one is uprooted. They've got apparently a root system that hooks into the next county almost. But my son, he went up there and he cut a bunch of the trees down, but then he left a bunch of them. I said, why'd you leave them? He said, well, they're not hurting the growth of the other trees. And he's right. And he said, how cool would it be to sell a curved coast redwood? I said, yeah, you got it right. I bought that at a garage sale. I was driving along this road one day, and it's the motor is a yellow thing, and the circular thing is a blade of some sort. Oh, yeah. And this little gizmo here is a friction wheel that drives this somehow. And my theory is whoever made them, which I haven't been able to figure out, I think I've seen it on the TV show 1,000 Ways to Die. But my theory is they made about 10 of them, put them out to someone to try them, and all the feedback was, it's a piece of garbage. But anyway, yeah, we're turning our shop. This is on the wall, it's hanging up on the wall. This is the ceiling up here. And, okay. And so you can see this redwood shelf, that's redwood, it goes all the way across, 39 feet. And we're putting old chainsaws, and many of them don't run, but in fact most of them. This is an unplaned piece of redwood lumber. And you can see the redwood lumber that's been packed. I think they're all planed. It dries without cracking, warping too bad, and I guess I'll take questions if you have any. Yes. Do I have experience in growing coast redwood in mixed stands? Yeah, we do. I talked about that highest point on the property and how the wind hits that. We bought some land from a neighbor that had a bunch of redwood on it because I influenced them, planted, and they were planted about close to 30 years ago now, roughly. Well, the redwood is sticking above everything else. And so these huge winds that came up, they knocked the tops out of several redwoods in that. It was 32 acres. And so my recommendation, it probably won't be a factor if you don't get hit hard with wind. But on our southwesterly and southerly slope that gets hammered almost every year, I bet that 80% of the years we get a windstorm of 70 miles per hour or more. And sometimes way over that. So if you don't have the wind problem, if you're in a gorge of some sort, semi-protected, it's not much of a factor. But the western red cedar that was planted at the same time, they had, I estimate, 10% of the biomass of the coast redwood. So, you want to grow wood, or you just want to have diversity.
So was it competing with this, the western red cedar, or?
Oh, no, the battle had been lost. The western red.
So you planted it as a 30-30-30 mix of
Well,
western red cedar?
the redwood takes off so fast that anything else planted next to it, the battle's lost. It's like Pee Wee Herman or Michael Jordan. Coast redwoods, Michael Jordan, everything else is Pee Wee Herman. Now, not to disparage Pee Wee Herman, but my guess is he's not quite as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. So, yeah.
I have two questions. I've had a lot more deer than I have bear. What about deer browse? That's my biggest problem with the permit.
We've got a lot of deer. We simply don't have deer browse on Redwood. Maybe we've taught the deer the correct things to eat. I don't know, but I'm not saying all deer are the same, but we don't have a problem.